Good evening to viewers in Asia and good afternoon and morning in Europe and America. I'm Gwen Robinson, President of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand, and tonight we're bringing you this webcast hosted by the FCCT on behalf of international rivers and partner organisations. As you all know, if you've tuned in, we're marking the 2-year anniversary of the tragic Laos dam disaster, the collapse of the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy dams, and how 2 years on the call for justice persists and people are still facing hardship and lack of compensation or recognition. On July 23rd, 2018, at least 70 people died or disappeared and over 7,000 were displaced when a dam collapsed in southern Laos. With little prior warning, a rushing wall of water inundated homes, families, and entire villages downstream in Attapeu province. The floodwaters extended far downstream, and thousands of people across the border in Cambodia also saw their homes, their land, and belongings damaged by the rising waters. 2 years later, those affected are yet to see justice. The Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy project is now operational and exporting electricity to Thailand. Thousands of people who lost family members, homes, land, and livelihoods in the tragedy remain in very difficult conditions and are yet to see answers regarding the collapse or full remediation. Despite efforts by UN human rights experts, concerned civil society, and many, many others, the public lacks transparent information on the causes of the collapse, steps to ensure the future safety of the structure, and plans to adequately compensate losses and harm and fully restore the livelihoods of these affected people. Today's very important panel discussion will explore continued efforts to seek answers and hold responsible actors to account. The event overall is co-organised by International Rivers with Mekong Watch, Inclusive Development International, Fair Finance Thailand, and the Korean Civil Society Task Force team for the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy dam collapse, of course with the support of the FCCT. I'd like to introduce our expert speakers tonight before I introduce a short video we will show. We have Philip Alston, the former UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Richard Meehan, Dam Engineering and Safety Expert, Sarani Achavunantakun, who is the Director of Thai Forest and Thai Fair Finance Network, and Elliot Ye-An Park, who is with the Korean Civil Society Task Force team in response to the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy dam collapse. Before we move to what promises to be a fascinating and important discussion, I would just like to introduce the very short video we're about to see and also invite all viewers to ask questions over our Facebook page. You'll see a slot for comments and questions on the side, and these will be addressed later by the moderator who is taking over from me shortly. I'll introduce him at the end. So first, the video. It's a Mekong Watch video developed by the NGO Mekong Watch to illustrate the devastating impact of the dam collapse on the people in the area who had previously relied on the land and river for their survival. 2 years later, as I've said, their futures remain uncertain and their strength as self-reliant communities is undermined. This film also identifies the project's international shareholders and financiers of the dam project and their responsibilities with respect to restoration of people's livelihoods and the surrounding environment. So without further ado, we will turn to the video, and after that, the FCCT Vice President, Jonathan Head, will join us to moderate the discussion. So please post your questions anytime from now. Over to our excellent technical wizard, David Foster, and Giant Media, who is going to handle the video and the rest of the broadcast. Thank you.
ภัยพิบัติที่เกิดจากส่วนแตกใน
วันที่23 กรกฎาคม 2018 เขื่อนไฟฟ้าเซเปียนเซน้ำน้อยได้ออกรายการฝากไปยังไปกับประสานจังหวัดตะปือให้ยกย้ายการสูบที่อยู่ใกล้เขตเขื่อนเซเปียนย้อนว่า
ยังต่างๆแล้วมาเบิ่งโมงเบิ่งเวลามันถึง8 โมงเช้าเพื่อพอดบาดทาสิจัดน้ำมันมาเพราะมันสิมาเป็นน้ำพามาเลยเป็นน้ำพาเป็นน้ำพานะ
เดี๋ยวนี้จะสูญหายประมาณจักคน
เดี๋ยวนี้นี่สูญหาย100%แล้วเดี๋ยวนี้20 คน
แล้วเด็กน้อยที่ว่าเสียชีวิตมีจักคน
13 คน
13 คน
และผู้เจ็บผู้เป็นก็โมกแฟนความเสี่ยงเพราะว่าคนแม่ม่านเนาะคนแม่ม่านเครื่องเฮือนป้ายสิอยู่เป็นแถวลูกตายแล้ว
เขาว่าน้ำขึ้นแตกจักสิแตกทางใดจักสิแตกทางเข้าบ่จักสิแตกทางเข้าบ่จักน้ำสิมาแล้วจังแก่
Hello again, viewers. After that very sobering take that puts it all into perspective, I'd like to turn to our first speaker, and at some point I will hand over to our moderator, Jonathan Head, who is just having some technical issues. So to turn to you first, Philip, you were UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, and I'm sure you've got a lot to say about this, so over to you.
Thanks very much, Gwen. It's a privilege to be able to speak on this panel. As some will know, I undertook a visit to the Lao People's Democratic Republic in March of last year. And one of the role of a UN Special Rapporteur is to ensure some form of accountability for governments all around the world. We visit all countries, but we do require an invitation from the government. The Lao government agreed to the visit, but immediately there was a major stumbling block, which is that when I indicated I would like to visit the area around the dam, the government said, no, that's impossible. It's not safe. And I got back to say that I knew that many other people had been there and that I too should be permitted to go there. At which point I was told, no, it's a national security issue. You can't go there. A rather lengthy negotiation ensued, and I indicated that the mission would not be viable or meaningful if such a trip was not permitted, and the government fortunately acquiesced. I went and met with many of the displaced villages. I saw the flooded villages. And of course, I spoke to a great many other people who have worked on this project. The details of what has happened and what has not happened subsequent to the disaster are fairly well known, thanks mainly to the sponsors of this webinar. And I won't go over those except to say that there are still thousands of people who are resettled in entirely unsatisfactory conditions. I spoke to a good number of them and got a sense of the deep frustration, a sense of the complete lack of information that they were given, and a sense of a totally uncertain future. Although when we say uncertain future, that's because the government keeps promising that things are going to happen. But there is very much a sense that these are forgotten people, that the government doesn't actually care. What you have is a government that is totally non-transparent, that does not permit any form of political participation, that imposes very steep penalties on those who raise critical issues. And it's a government that has combined a strategy of traditional authoritarianism with almost rampant capitalism. That capitalism has involved giving concessions, particularly to foreign economic interests in relation to a wide range of different issues. When it comes to hydroelectric power, what is most shocking is that the returns on all the investment and all the long-term debt that has been assumed to the national budget are absolutely minimal. There is a long-term hope that returns will be significantly greater. But of course, the failure to undertake a thorough and published investigation of what happened in this particular case should raise questions in relation to the dozens of other dams that the government has already built or is planning to build. So there's not just the human rights dimension that one should be looking very carefully at what happened, but there is also the dimension of economic prudence to really establish what happened and to make the necessary adjustments in the overall system. In terms of the people who have been displaced, this is a response that is completely lacking in any form of accountability. The government, of course, has pointed the finger at the private actors, and we will hear today from the groups in Korea who have been working to try to establish accountability for one of the key private actors, and we'll hear how unsatisfactory that has been. But for its own part, the government has really been completely unaccountable. The officials with whom I met when I was there gave very optimistic assessments of what was happening on the ground, of the fate of the people who had been displaced, and none of that matched in any way the reality that I ascertained for myself. The staggering thing is that the numbers involved in this actual displacement are relatively small, 7,000 people, and a fairly generous package could easily have been put together, particularly given the amount of very significant foreign assistance that was made available precisely for that purpose. But instead, the government has chosen the path of inaction, basically. It has not done what would be expected of a government in this sort of situation. The people have been condemned to a miserable existence where they're being fed as though they were in a zoo. They're being promised arable land, but the sort of lands that have been made available, to the best of my knowledge, turned out to be completely unsuitable, unsatisfactory. And it's a very bad situation. Let me then engage in a little bit of self-criticism. The United Nations system obviously cannot compel any government, the Australian government where I come from, the United States government where I live, or the government of the Lao People's Republic to do what it doesn't want to do. But the human rights system should be able to focus attention, should be able to mobilize public opinion in some way. In this case, the system has, in principle, worked as it should. I produced 2 detailed reports, an end of mission statement followed by an official report to the Human Rights Council, all of which documented this comprehensively. In the absence of any serious steps in the intervening year or more, a group of special rapporteurs then sent a complaint letter to the government and to the key corporations in April of this year. Again, very little response. It's been very difficult to get media attention for anything related to Laos. Certainly the human rights issues are pretty much off the agenda. Most of the partners, whether corporate or diplomatic, are very reluctant to speak out critically because the government cracks down so hard and takes a basically punitive approach. But that sort of cowardice is deeply regrettable, and it means that the victims in this case and the victims in cases that will almost certainly follow because no effective remedial steps have been taken are simply left to fend for themselves. And that's a tragedy. It's even more tragic in a country which has seen record levels of economic growth, for many years, which has immense natural resources and huge potential to develop and to provide a good standard of living for all of its people. That is not being done. Very little money is being spent on what I would call social protection for the poorer members of the society. There is a systematic deprivation of access to land for many people, turning that land over to often foreign interests in terms of agriculture, in terms of hydropower. And again, the tragedy is that the UN human rights system has not succeeded in shining more attention or drawing more attention to this situation. So 2 years after the collapse, let me just express my deep sympathy for obviously those who died, the 71 people, but equally for the 7,000 people who are displaced and who remain in a completely unsatisfactory situation. And I would hope that the international community would not simply let this anniversary pass, but would resolve to see what they can do to bring about a much more satisfactory outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip, for that very sobering update. And I'm sure Elliot, who is coming next and speaking for the Korean Civil Society Task Force team on the dam collapse, has further insight. And as mentioned, please, to all viewers, do post some questions on Facebook if you want, and we'll turn to those later. So, Elliot, over to you.
Thank you. It is an honor to join the respectable panel tonight and the viewers who's with us at the moment. My name is Elliot Park, and I am here today as a member of Korean Civil Society Task Force team. And as Gwen kindly introduced, we're a coalition of 7 Korean civil society organizations with various backgrounds. And it seems that my PowerPoint is not going up, but I will, yes, there. Okay. All right. So today I would like to focus my presentation on the complaint submitted to Korean NCP. So on June 28th of 2019, the Korean Civil Society Task Force team submitted a complaint to the Korean OECD National Contact Point. It is an independent oversight body established by the Korean government to promote the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises and regarding the collapse of a Zero Dam D built for Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy reservoir that collapsed. And as Philip said, it is pretty much the only official grievance mechanism that we could take advantage of in the case where the actors are business actors and financial actors from various countries, and the project itself happened overseas. So the guidelines are a set of voluntary and non-binding recommendations aimed at minimizing the adverse impact from the activities of multinational enterprises and encouraging them to fulfill social responsibilities and to respect human rights in host countries while promoting international investment. The complaint that we submitted presented multiple violations of human rights, environmental, and disclosure provisions of the guidelines that was committed by SK Engineering and Construction, Korea Western Power Company, and the Export-Import Bank of Korea. The complaint also argued the faulty design and poor construction of the dam structure. I'm sure Professor Mian has a lot more insight to add to that. and also the lack of contingency plans in case of the dam collapse, and the respondents' refusal to meet with civil groups or to disclose any relevant information as requested by us. As for the Export-Import Bank of Korea, we argued in our complaint that, among others, the guidelines should also apply to the Export-Import Bank of Korea, as it profited also from signing a commercial contract to provide financial consulting services in relation to this project. Okay. So in compliance with the procedural guidance in the guidelines, the Korean NCP made an initial assessment when this specific instance was received. The initial assessment is a process which determines whether the issue raised is a bona fide and is relevant to the implementation of the guidelines. And if the NCP determines that it warrants it is a bona fide issue, then it offers good office. So the Korean NCP, after reviewing the 6 factors that should be considered in the initial assessment, determined that KNCP would offer good offices for this case because after reviewing the complaint, the issues raised in the complaint it deemed are material and substantiated, and because the KNCP thought that it could contribute in serving the purpose and effectiveness of the guidelines by facilitating a resolution through negotiations and the good offices. However, the KNCP dismissed the Export-Import Bank of Korea as party to the NCP procedure, referencing its evaluation in similar cases in the past that the guidelines are not applicable to official development aid projects for an entity that is regulated nationally by special legislation and for which special arrangements exist within the OECD for the purpose of achieving national policy goals, such as the Export-Import Bank of Korea, then the guidelines do not apply. So on July 23rd of 2020, exactly 2 years after the tragic dam collapse destroyed lives of so many innocent people in the area, the Korean NCP issued a final statement which effectively ended the official grievance mechanism by the NCP. In its statement, the KNCP explained that no agreement was reached because both SKENC and Korea Western Power Company have refused to participate in the NCP procedure. The KNCP kept emphasizing that the NCP procedure is not to determine whether the respondent has violated the guidelines or not, but to determine whether the NCP can help the parties involved resolve the conflict by offering its good offices for dialogue. So basically limiting its role only as contacting the parties to see if the parties are willing to participate in the process of good offices to discuss with each other to reach a mutually acceptable agreement. So in effect, it removed itself from doing anything tangible and effective and efficient to bring the parties together, which is indispensable in this case because the parties often are unwilling, especially the business actors. And oftentimes they claim that they have observed all the local laws and regulations and that there is no need for them to answer to any responsibilities that's not determined under the law. The KNCP made several recommendations at the end of its statement, urging the respondents to establish communication channels with the complainants for continued discussion and to implement an internal system within these business actors to promote the fulfillment of corporate responsibility and to submit a performance evaluation report back to KNCP after 6 months of the statement. That was pretty much the only kids, if I can express it that way, for this statement to have. But in effect, it was just the words that does not have any power to force the parties to do anything. So the Korean Civil Society Task Force team was deeply disappointed, of course, by the KNCP's final statement and the lack of genuine and effective efforts to actually bring the respondents to the table to engage in meaningful dialogue that will provide full compensation for the losses and harm suffered by the victims and are continuing to suffer. In response to the KNCP's final statement, the Korean Civil Society Task Force team issued a statement the next day urging SKENC to provide transparent and credible claims process for redress and rehabilitation, and to take substantial measures to reinforce the structural integrity of the entire dam complex. Also, as the Xe Pian-Se Namnoy hydropower project was a public-private partnership, which was financed by Economic Development Cooperation Fund of Korea, we urged the Korean government to establish concrete measures to prevent similar man-made disasters from happening in the future. Among others, we urge the government of Korea to make the application of the safeguard mandatory to all aids and development assistances, and that it should ensure transparent execution of EDCF project and should establish reliable and independent accountability and grievance mechanism to guarantee the right to remedy. Civil society organizations monitoring the dam collapse have repeatedly sought to engage the business stakeholders involved in this project by seeking responses to letters and by providing opportunities to engage in dialogues. However, it is more than disappointing that we have received only very limited responses from the stakeholders so far. We welcome the news that SKENC has agreed with Lao government in compensation package, but we will continue to monitor the funds allocation and dissemination to each affected village. And we urge the government of Korea to strengthen the workings of Korean NCP to turn it from a paper tiger to a genuinely effective way of ensuring human rights violations, to ensure human rights in business settings. Our heart goes out to all those suffered and who are still suffering. And it is very disappointing, and I am very sorry to convey that the only official grievance mechanism that we could rely on proved to be ineffective. But we are hoping for the better future, and we will continue to work with this international CSOs and other member organizations to bring meaningful changes. Thank you for having me.
Okay, everybody, I think if it's okay, I better introduce myself. I'm Jonathan Head, the BBC Southeast Asia correspondent here in Bangkok. Sorry for being late. My colleague Gwen thankfully stepped into the breach when I had to quickly deal with something else. So I will be moderating from now on this really very important subject. A welcome to all of you and our distinguished speakers, and thank you very much, Elliot, for that perspective on your attempts to get some kind of accountability in Korea. And Korea is such a huge investor in this region that is a very, very important process for ensuring justice and accountability in business. I'd like to throw the floor over now to Sarani Achawanuntakun. Sarani, obviously you can give a slightly broader and more regional perspective, in particular here in Thailand. We must always be cognizant of the fact that Thailand is both one of the largest customers and investors in dams in Laos. Over to you.
Sure. Yes, thank you. Hi, Jonathan and everyone. It's my honor to be on the panel, and also hello to the viewers at home. So I represent Fair Finance Thailand. We're a network of 5 organizations who share a common interest in promoting sustainable banking here in Thailand. So basically our member organizations include South Forest, it's a research company, International Rivers, Earth, the Ecological Recovery, In-Law Foundation, who specializes in community rights, as well as a consumer foundation for consumers, who's the largest consumer group in Thailand. So involvement with the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy, I think it's very sobering to hear the previous speakers talk about their long, I think, attempts to try to find measure of accountability. So in comparison, our journey has really just begun very recently. Late last year, we as a network published a case study on the Sayaburi Dam, which is another large dam in Laos that also is being built with Thai money from Thai lenders, as well as a case of Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy. So for those of you who are interested, can download our case study from the fairfinancethailand.org website. In regards to the 2-year anniversary, as Philip mentioned, we are trying to follow up with the letter from the UN Working Group to the respective banks. There are 4, as you can see from the video shown at the beginning, there are 4 lenders involved, one of which is a government-owned bank, the Exim Bank, but the other 3 banks are all private banks. There are Krung Thai Bank, Thanachart Bank, and the Bank of Ayutthaya. So we, on the eve of the 2nd year anniversary, so just last Friday, the 23rd of July, we sent an open letter to the Bank of Thailand, as well as to each of the 4 banks, to follow up and to try to get them to respond to the UN Working Group letter. So it's been more than almost 3 months already, and so far only Krung Thai Bank responded to the UN Working Group. And we are quite disappointed actually by the response of Krung Thai Bank, because it doesn't really reflect that the bank will do more. It doesn't show that the bank will do more to try to find effective remedy for the affected villagers. So I think Krung Thai Bank's stance pretty much echoes what I think many banks in Thailand right now seem to view this incident. So they think this dam collapse as being an accident that no one wanted to happen, and they see that the banks are not directly responsible, and therefore they don't see that this is an incident where it should lead to better grievance mechanisms or any kind of effective remedy. And in terms of remedy, the banks, I think it was in the news also for some time, including RAD, which is the Thai company who's also a shareholder in the project company. So 2 years ago, all the banks, when we saw news about this, they donated money. So they tried to send some compensation in terms of, but it's more like seen as a kind of CSR, and a lot of them try to give it through the Laos government. So I think the position, the stance of the banks pretty much is that we have done, this is regrettable, it's a regrettable incident. We have done all that we can in terms of helping to alleviate, to help those affected. But they don't see it as a systemic issue or, an instance where that calls for better management of ESG risk, or they don't see it as a call to press the project company for better remedy or to follow up with with the affected villagers. So we think that there is still a lot of work to be done. So in our letter to the Bank of Thailand and the banks, we also sent the letter, a copy to the Thai Bankers Association, because the Thai Banker Association last August, so in August 2019, issued a public document called the Sustainable Banking Guidelines on Responsible Lending. And that's actually been signed by all of their members. So Exim Bank is actually not part of the association as they are a specialized government bank, but all the other private banks signed this document. And it actually spelled out very clearly that the banks will commit to improving their ESG, the environmental, social, and governance issues in their operation. It states very clearly that the banks will engage with stakeholders beyond their shareholders, including stakeholders that have been materially negatively affected. And we think that Xe Pian case is clearly a litmus test, so to speak, of how serious banks are with the guidelines. So we think that at the very least, all the banks should respond to the UN Working Group letter, and they should definitely engage with their project client as a client to implement better remedy to those affected. So we think that if since all the banks signed these guidelines, then it's time to basically put their money where what they say, so to speak. So to be very serious about implementing. Another I would say small move, but could be significant, is that a few Thai banks have already announced that they would adopt the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. So the lenders of Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy, none of them expressed this commitment very clearly. Actually, all the private banks say that we adhere to the human rights, but they don't really spell out the principles. But one bank in the lending group, the Thanachart Bank, is being merged with another big bank in Thailand, the Thai Military Bank, or TMB. And TMB actually, based on the Fair Finance assessments of the policies last year, actually came highest in our scoring. So they show the most kind of improvement. So we are also hoping to engage with TMB as well as a kind of amalgam of the new entity that's going to be including Thanachart Bank. TMB is one of the few Thai banks that publicly announced that they would adopt UN guiding principles on business and human rights, have already expressed that they would establish grievance mechanisms for the affected stakeholders of their clients. So in the coming days and months, we're hoping to engage with Bank of Thailand more clearly on how we see this case as a test of the responsible lending guidelines, because otherwise it would just be a piece of paper that that doesn't lead to any real change in the bank's operation. I think another development that could be worth mentioning is that Thailand, as many of you might know, also announced the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights last November. So the government actually went to Geneva and presented this. And in the content, it actually mentions cross-border investments as one of the key areas that the government have to improve the oversight, and also mentions the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC, who regulates the stock market as a key regulator to implement rules regarding the UN guiding principles, including the relevant complaints mechanisms and disclosures. So since all these three of the four lenders who finance Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy are listed companies in Thailand, so we're hoping for potential to engage with the SEC on this issue as well, because the SEC right now, as part of their work on National Action Plan, are studying how to improve disclosures on human rights, as well as related tools and guidance documents that they are planning to announce. So we're hoping to raise this case, to bring this case as an example as well of what listed companies should be doing.
Thank you very much, Sarani. Obviously, Thailand's role, again, crucial. Very interesting to hear the growing awareness of the need to show corporate social responsibility among Thai banks and other companies. Richard, Mian, I think we've got you back. We lost you for a moment. If you're there and you can speak to us, we'd be very grateful now to hear the engineer's perspective, in particular the things that you found out from your study of what happened at Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy Dam, and perhaps some lessons for other dams as well.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a great opportunity. I've read many of the things that the other participants in the panel have written, and I've been very impressed, and it's really great to be part of this group. I'd like to start off by giving a little background about how I became involved in the study of the failure of the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy project. I first set foot in Thailand in September of 1963. I was following in the footsteps of a famous Thai engineer named Kun Sukhumvit. Kun Sukhumvit was the first graduate of MIT, Thai graduate of MIT, and he came back to Thailand in the 1950s, and he carried out some remarkable projects, including the road, Sukhumvit, that we all know, that stretched from Bangkok to the Cambodian border, and also, even more significantly, the Mitrapop Highway, which goes from Saraburi up into Isan, which used to be accessible mainly by railroad and ox cart in the old days. So Mr. Sukhumvit's efforts were designed to connect the central part of Thailand with the northeast, with Isan, and in particular with the what's called the Dang Rak Escarpment, which is a very rugged mountain chain that runs all the way from Korat to Surin to Sisaket to the famous contested Prat Wihan, and then terminates in a last fragment on the Bolavan Plateau in Laos, which is the setting for the failure that occurred that I'm going to discuss here. My job when I came here in 1963, I was a young engineer just out of the Army, was to try to help design and build a dam in terrain in Korat province, mountainous terrain between Korat and Bangkok. It was very, very similar to the conditions in the Bolavan Plateau. And this was quite a jarring experience for me, because I had some military construction experience, but I really didn't know very much about dam building, and I and the group of Thai engineers who went up there to build this project, which was a pretty good sized project, similar to the Xe Pian project, didn't have a lot of experience, and it wasn't long before we ran into some real problems. And this was very unsettling for a young engineer, 22, 23 years old, to be designing a project that he had to worry was going to fail. And we actually did have the beginning of a failure, and the failure was not in the dam itself, but it was in the ground under the dam. And from that, I learned that if you don't have good ground to build your dam on, then you're in deep trouble. So when the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy Saddle Dam D failed a couple of years ago, I was immediately interested in that, because I recognized that the setting of the dam was very similar to the one that I had worked on back when I was a young engineer, and I thought I might have something useful to contribute to the reason for it. And I was very encouraged, because the Prime Minister of Laos very soon issued a call and said that he wanted international community of engineers and experts to assist in trying to figure out in a very transparent way what had happened at Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy. It was a very clear statement and very encouraging. And so I went up to Vientiane and I knocked on doors of offices. I went to the power company. I went to the Ministry of Mines, expecting to be able to access information about what had happened. And although the lovely people, by and large, that I met up there were very polite to me, they would go back into the back office and then return and say, well, not now. Oh, you cannot see any information right now. Now, that was 2 years ago. And the remarkable thing to me is that all of the information about that project, the design information, the operation information up to the time of failure, has been kept in complete secrecy ever since then. And I'm just not used to that sort of thing. And it still troubles me that even the international expert panel that the Lao government put together to investigate the cause of the failure, as part of their contract, they were sworn to secrecy. And that report has remained secret ever since. But since I did have a little background on this subject and I was fascinated by the whole thing, I thought, well, maybe I can do my own diagnosis because we have a lot of tools now that governments cannot control, like satellite photographs and bits and pieces of data that get filed away in obscure places and on the internet and so on and so forth. And sure enough, I found after a couple of months that I could find out quite a bit from satellite photos. I could find quite a bit from casual photographs and information recorded by tourists who had accidentally wandered illegally into the dam site. And best of all, I could find from Japanese files that the Japanese, quite a few years ago, this project had been on the back burner for many, many years. And the Japanese had done a study of the project back quite a few years ago, meticulously done study, Japanese style, wonderful professional work, detailed, and then filed away and basically disappeared from the public record. I don't, to this day, know whether the designers of the final project as it was built even know about this work that the Japanese did. Certainly, I am pretty sure that the work was never replicated. But interestingly enough, that the Japanese studies included a study of the dam site, the actual dam site where the project was built, and said there are going to be problems at this dam site because the site is underlain by geology that is unstable and very leaky, and that this is going to be a problem. I'm going to show a series of slides now, and the first one is going to be a little bit offbeat. It is what it appears to be, and that is it's a dessert that I took my wife out for an anniversary dinner about a year ago, and to this nice restaurant we like here, and she ordered this dessert, and she took the first bite, and I said to her, you know, this is absolutely remarkable. And I'm sure she thought that I was going to say something like that we've been married for 15 years or something like that. And she said, why? And I said, because this is exactly the situation. This shows the situation at the Bolivan Plateau at the dam failure. Well, I think she was happy to hear that. But I want you to notice a couple of things about this. Notice that there's a high plateau-like configuration of cake here that's in layers, and that on the top there's this chocolate that's been poured on. And as I said to my wife at the time, I said, now if you were going to build a dam to hold water on the top of that cake, you probably wouldn't want to build it on the chocolate, would you? Okay, so let me jump from that to a visualization of the Bolivan Plateau that I made using a technique I've tried to develop called texture mapping. And this shows the Bolivan Plateau. And if you think of it as a layered cake on the south side, the near side, with some chocolate-like sauce on the upper left, what you're really seeing here is a layered series of sandstone and shale beds on the south side where the blue is, which is the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy reservoir. But up to the left toward the town of Pak Song, what you're seeing is lava. This is a volcano, not a Mount Fuji type volcano, but it's lava that has been issuing from little calderas, little pimply-like holes in the ground for a long, long time, and flowing over the top of that sedimentary rock and flowing down into the valley below. And as you can see at the location of number 1, which is where the main dam is, the Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy project is built right at the interface of the point where that lava, that chocolate sauce, so to speak, is pushing up against the sandstone. And this is the key to understanding what happened in this failure. All right. This is another close-up textured map. And number 1 is the main dam. Now, the problem that the designers faced with this project is they have a lot of rainfall on the top of this plateau, and which is great because if you can collect that rainfall during July and August and September, when most of it falls right now, and hold it throughout the rest of the year, you can then generate a smooth supply of electricity and send it to our Bangkok shopping malls or whatever throughout the rest of the year. But you have to be able to store that water. And it's very hard to find anything more than a few cracks and hollows up in that country up there where you can store a lot of water. So the engineers, in order to get the storage requirement for the project, they had to really push the height of the dam to the point where the water started to spill over the edge of the plateau. And in order to get that extra storage that they need to make the project profitable, they really had to raise that water as high as possible. And the only way to do that was the main dam wasn't sufficient. They had to push the storage so it came up and began to cover the purple area, which is the lava basalt, the chocolate, so to speak, that I showed on the first slide. And the problem is, as the Japanese had pointed out to them many years ago, is that lava is very unstable. So there's a risk factor. As soon as you raise the storage enough to make the project turn a profit, you're pushing it to the point where you're getting into some dangerous ground. And I knew about that because I had had the same problem in the 1960s in my own dam, or the dam that I helped build here in Thailand. Okay, let's take a look at detail. If you look down in the where it says failed saddle dam D, you see there are 3 little symbols that are meant to indicate landslides. That is, land that has slid down into the valley. And you'll notice that one of them actually is not even associated with the dam at all. And the other 2 are independent slides that occurred on both sides. Now, the point I'm going to make here is that although it is true that the dam failed, what really happened is the land failed before the dam failed, leaving the dam with no support, so that the dam then simply washed away downstream. And we'll see that in the next couple of slides. Now, I want you to look at the other two dams shown here, and that is Saddle Dam E and Saddle Dam F. Now, Saddle Dam D has been completely replaced, and very wisely, they moved that dam off the purple area, off the chocolate sauce, so to speak, and moved it into the yellow, which is much more stable ground. Shortly after the failure, the power company announced that they were going to do the same thing with Saddle Dam E and Saddle Dam F, because we know that at the time of the failure, Saddle Dam E and Saddle Dam F had also started to fail. And the only reason they didn't fail completely is because when Saddle Dam D gave way, the reservoir dropped down and there was no more pressure on Saddle Dams E and F. I think I mentioned before that everyone said, well, Saddle Dam E and Saddle Dam F are just as dangerous as Saddle Dam D. And the power company at one point announced that they were going to have to replace Saddle Dam E and Saddle Dam F with concrete dams, just as they did at Saddle Dam D. However, there is no alternative place to put a concrete dam at Saddle Dam E and Saddle Dam F like there is at Saddle Dam D. So that replacement never took place. Now, shortly after the failure, a drone video of the whole site surfaced. Whoever produced it is not known. It was quickly removed from the internet. I suspect it was probably somebody who worked for the contractor. But this gives you the picture of Saddle Dam D a few days after the failure, and you'll notice that a prominent feature is this black rock that exists buried about 10 to 20 meters below the surface of the ground. And that black rock is lava. If you've ever seen pictures of lava flows in Hawaii, it looks very similar to this. And that lava can convey a tremendous amount of water. It is full of huge cracks that you could put your fist in, and you can put a whole stream into the lava and it will simply disappear and then reappear, often as a waterfall, miles away from the point where it goes into the ground. So that lava is a powerful aquifer. On top of that lava is a crusty soil that is basically old rotten lava that is called laterite. It's a red soil, and you see there's a blanket of that soil on top of the lava that's 20 meters under the dam, 10 meters if you go downstream, and even further down the river, you can see there's still a 10-meter laterite blanket. Now, this sets up a situation where if water is allowed to get into the lava under the foundation and then starts bubbling up and pressurizing the red soil downstream from the dam, that soil will become completely unstable and begin to slide into the canyon. And you can see that there were 3 separate slides that occurred here. One on the right abutment slide, one on the left abutment slide, and another one independent from the dam downstream. And these slides occurred because the black lava underneath was pressurized, and uplifted the soil, so the soil just broke apart like ice on a river in springtime and began to flow downhill. And once that happened, let me back up here a bit. Before the dam was ever built, the situation looked like this, and the arrows are mostly conveying water through the basalt, which is the gray layer at the bottom. The soil on top of the basalt is the red, the laterite, and even before the dam was built, water that rainwater, and there's 2 or 3 meters of rain that falls in this area, would sink into the ground further up the canyon and disappear and travel as an underground stream under the canyon. The dam, originally they intended to do something about strengthening the foundation under the dam, but the plans were changed to save money, and the dam was simply put on top of this soil layer. And when the reservoir began to fill, the water continued to go under the dam through this basalt aquifer and appear, I surmise, as springs and waterfalls downstream of the project. As this water pressure, as the reservoir raised or became higher on the dam in the last few days before the failure, that water pressure increased and uplifted the soil, which began to simply slide and float down into the canyon. And this is looking only at the left abutment, and you see there are the 2 distinctly different slides that developed there. The last stage of the failure was with the loss of support of the ground downstream of the dam itself became unstable because there was nothing to keep it from simply joining the sliding movement and continuing down. And this is basically what happened the day before the day of the failure. So, to sum up my point that I'm making here is we had at number 2, the failed saddle dam. And that having failed, that has now been replaced by the replacement saddle dam, which is at number 5, which is built not on the purple weak basalt, but on better rock. But saddle dams E and F, which had already started to fail, have not been replaced. And now they are trying to put the project back into operation. They say that it is complete, but I raise the question of why can it be considered complete if those 2 other saddle dams haven't been replaced? It's true, the Korean contractor has done some work dumping some rock downstream of the dam to try to stabilize the slopes, but this measure has not been approved by even the Lao government's consultants. It's something done independently by the Korean contractor, and I think there's a serious question as to whether it's going to be effective when and if the reservoir fills again and the water encroaches on saddle dams E and F. So I would say that the future of this project is very uncertain. I think I've taken enough time. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Richard. Just before we just throw the floor open to questions, very quickly, just to clarify a conclusion for what you were saying. Are you stating that that location is simply not an appropriate place to be building a dam, or that it could be done but simply needs to be done differently?
I think, boy, that's a good question. It would have been a much more expensive project because I think you would have had to have taken all of that red laterite out and built the dam on something more solid. And I think that would have caused the cost of the project to, it's $1 billion project, and I can easily imagine that the price could have gone up, half again as much. So.
Thanks very much. Listen, I've got another question from an audience member here. This is actually for Philip Alston. One member has asked, what do you think it would take for the people who were affected by this disaster to get the help they need? It's been 2 years. Promises were made. Have you found in your dealings with the Lao government that there is a responsiveness there? There are parts of it that want things to be better, want more help to get through, and that or is it just is it completely hopeless at the moment? I mean, 2 years is a very long time.
I can't say that I have any grounds for optimism. There's a curious situation in the country where you have a central government that is very detached from this stuff and is run in a very top-down manner. So the likelihood of a mid-level official being able to move things in the absence of the leadership sending a message is quite low. At the same time, local authorities are actually very powerful in their own way. And so if the local authorities have their own interests, in other words, they just want to protect the access of themselves and their friends to land and to the other resources, they too have no incentive to assist the victims. So I don't know what sort of political constellation needs to emerge. My assumption is that international pressure is probably the only thing that is actually going to make a difference.
Do you feel, Philip, there's been enough of a priority made on this particular issue by international stakeholders and governments who've been engaging with Laos?
Laos is a real puzzle for me. I remember doing an interview immediately after my mission with a journalist, and the journalist said to me, I told my boss that I was going to meet with you and do something on the situation in Laos. And my boss looked at me and said, why? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, no one's interested in Laos. There's just not much happening there. And I think that human rights groups have not done well by Laos. I don't think they're reporting. I think they allow the repressive approach of the government to prevent meaningful reporting. I think they assume the population of 7 million is too small, that the number of chronic violations is limited, and therefore they don't expose the much deeper set of problems. So it's not getting the publicity that it should be getting.
Thank you very much. There's actually another question just come in. Sarani, this one's directed to you. It's quite an interesting one about, given what's happened to Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy, are Thai banks recalculating the risks they're exposed to in funding dams in Laos? I mean, it's not just this, it's also the controversies about whether these dams are viable, whether there is the surplus of power, I believe, that's now coming out of Lao dams. Is there a recalibration of risk by the Thai banks, who are very important funders?
Okay. Yes, I think we do see a slight change of attitude from Thai banks. I would say it's not necessarily from the Xe Pian incident, because as I said, pretty much all the bankers that I know see this as an accident, so to speak. But it's mostly due to the rising alarm on the big projects such as Sayapri and the, I think, attendant research that, for example, there was one article in the New York Times a few months ago on the dams being built in China and how that has affected the water levels and downstream livelihood. So I think it's those kinds of articles, as well as rising, I would say, scrutiny on the bank's lending activities in Laos that is prompting them to I would not say that they are reevaluating the risk of financing in Laos, but I would say they are taking more time, so to speak. The next large project that is coming up in the pipeline would be the Luang Prabang Dam. And I think this is one to look for whether whether Thai banks will still be involved. We heard from one of the private banks, the large private banks, that they will not be participating in the loans, although they do mention that as because all these financing have to be done as a syndication, it's a syndicated loan, so they are kind of being asked by the other lenders of the previous projects why they are not. So I think there are some, I would say, at this point we see some hesitation among Thai banks. I don't think there's enough evidence for us to say that there has been improvements in terms of accounting for ESG risk in their due diligence, in their project financing. But I would say that they are taking a more cautious approach at this point in the dam financing. But again, I urge everyone who's watching, as well as all the organizations involved, to follow the Luang Prabang Dam project, because that would be something that, I mean, if Thai banks do decide to finance, then that would be to us a very clear indication that they haven't really changed their view of ESG risk. Yes.
Thanks very much indeed. Philip, I've got one question here to you about the role of other developments in partner to call out their Korean and Thai counterparts. I mean, you've talked about the lack of engagement with Laos, but it does seem that the governments of Thailand and Korea on this particular issue do have a potentially useful role to play. Have you been able to get other governments to sort of recognize that they should be putting pressure perhaps on the Thais and the Koreans to take this issue more seriously? Is that a sort of indirect way of getting diplomatic pressure on the Laos?
I have to say that when I met with government representatives in Vientiane, but also in Bangkok, I found a remarkable reluctance to take a strong position, even government to government. I don't think there was a sufficient interest in the situation in Laos generally on the part of those governments. And so the only real focus was economic. They wanted to be able to facilitate investment by their nationals. They wanted to profit from the situation in Laos. And so they haven't been prepared to take any sort of strong position to pressure the government to change its practices. And I think that is extremely disappointing because, as I said earlier, it would take so little effort to actually right this particular injustice.
Thanks very much, Philip. There is another question here. This one's for Elliot, about South Korea's reputation, Elliot. After the publicity that was given to the role of a big Korean engineering firm, is there an awareness in South Korea, or a sense that this disaster has damaged South Korea's reputation, the reputation of its great industrial companies, and that among the public, is there kind of pressure for Korean companies to engage in a more responsible way with their investments in Southeast Asia?
Well, it seems that there was a damage to their publicity in the beginning, right after the disaster has happened. But in the end, it seems unless the government really puts pressure on the companies to really respect the human rights obligations in doing the transnational overseas business projects, there wasn't much public pressure per se from Korean population. So in the beginning, it was more on a humanitarian level. People were sympathizing with the victims, and the donations and the voluntary helps have been pouring in. But we know that voluntary help or those helps on a social responsibility level doesn't really change the system itself, but it is the government's determination to really hold the involved parties responsible for this kind of disaster. But because yes.
I mean, does publicity help? I mean, do the Korean media pick these things up? Because Korea is a more accountable country than many others in this region, and certainly public opinion has had a big impact on other issues. Do you sense that perhaps you could raise more awareness and get more pressure on the government to be more active?
We have been doing that, and well, for the past 2 years, we've been doing a lot of publicity campaignings and also held at press conferences and all. However, it does seem that because South Korea is pushing for the new Southern policy that's focusing on Southeast Asia, the media does not really follow up with what's going on in Laos and how the responsible parties are fulfilling their what they should do to really help these people, the victims, to go back to their lives. And it is very unfortunate that the media really quickly loses interest and move on to the next issue. But we will continue to raise issues and urge the media to stay focused and have interest in these issues. Well, for the past 2 years, the success has been limited, which is very unfortunate, but we are looking forward to continuing our efforts, such as by publishing the white book on all the information that we've gathered so far on this Lao issue. And with the COVID-19, it has been really limiting our what we can do in terms of actually visiting the sites or bringing the human side of the story. But oftentimes this disaster happening in relation to this huge project, it's very complicated. It's hard for the public to understand who's at fault because there are so many actors involved. And we are trying to really break down the story so that people can see the human sides and the sufferings that are actually happening. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, as a journalist, all I can say is guilty as charged when it comes to short-term interest in stories. It is a constant problem. Richard, I've got a question for you that's come in, and this is a viewer who's asking whether you're going to have the same risk now every year, every rainy season, even with the repairs and the changes they've made to the dam at Xe Pian-Xe Namnoy.
Well, I've been following this this year. Interestingly, it hasn't been a heavy rain year, but they appear not to be allowing the reservoir to fill. They've kept the water away from the dams, and I can speculate optimistically that perhaps they recognize the problem themselves and they are preventing the reservoir from filling because they do intend to actually replace those dams. But if they don't replace those dams, my own view is that as soon as the reservoir fills completely, and of course, in order to meet the design requirements and generate the power that they would make the project profitable, they have to fill the reservoir completely when the rain allows for it. My own view is that there will be an extreme danger because those two dams were already starting to fail. So I don't know what their plan is, and I feel justified in speculating here to a certain degree because if the contractor and the investors and the Lao government keep everything secret, then there's something wrong. Something is being hidden, and I just don't think that that's right. So that makes me adds to my suspicion, and I think that this it may not fill at all this year. It may be 2 or 3 years, but when it does fill, I think there's a good possibility they could have the same kind of failure all over again, but on one of the other 2 saddle dams.
Thanks very much, Philip. I've got somebody's put a question here that they can answer from both Philip and from Sarani. Looking at the transboundary aspects of this disaster, it hasn't just affected communities in Laos, but also downstream in Cambodia as well. This questioner asks how companies can be held responsible for the impacts on these communities, even in a different country, when they're building projects in this way. The very fact that it's transboundary, does that give you more leeway to hold companies responsible or not? Perhaps Philip, you could start by answering that question.
This is such a frustrating set of issues. The other speakers have described in detail the terrific work that's been done both in South Korea and in Thailand to try to really establish some sort of corporate accountability in these cases. But we're left with a picture of an overall system that is really very weak in the absence of major public pressure on the corporations to respond. It highlights what is well known, which is the weakness of the international human rights system when it comes to corporate responsibility for human rights violations. And I don't think nearly enough is being done in the overall sense to try to improve that situation. So when you get to a simple trans-border Cambodia-Laos problem, it runs up against all of the difficulties of trying to extract meaningful accountability from large corporate actors that are not put under appropriate pressure by either their own home governments or the host governments.
Thanks, Philip. Sarani, your own thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if we have I guess more optimism, but what we I think can do at least in Thailand is given the instrument I mentioned, the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, and that does mention cross-border investments. It does spell out the various government agencies who will be in charge of implementing the plan. I think the least we can do in Thailand is to call out these incidents as either examples of how the government is not being serious with implementing the plan, or call out the various corporations in Thailand on, because I think one trend we see is their increasing interest in human rights, at least as a kind of public announcement. More corporations in Thailand, including banks, have announced that they will adhere to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and I think that it's therefore anyone has a right to call them out on what actually is the concrete mechanisms they put in place to call them out on whether or not they have, for example, implemented the complaints mechanisms properly, and to the banks. I think Xe Pian is a good case in the sense that the damage is very clear, the sufferings are manifest, and so it's just a matter of what actually are the corporations involved doing, given their public commitment to human rights. So I think that in Thailand we will continue to call them out, and as well as engaging with the Bank of Thailand and the Security Exchange Commission, I would say, as the two major regulators on the implementation of the National Action Plan. The Bank of Thailand is also partly there as a promoter of sustainable banking practices. So again, we see this as a very important test, and so we'll continue to call out the various actors, on whether or not they are improving their practices.
Sarani, thank you very much. We are actually just about out of time. So I'd like to thank Philip, Richard, Sarani, and Elliot for giving us their time on this really important issue. And of course, International Rivers and the Foreign Correspondents Club for making this event possible. And just a quick thanks too to our superb technician, David Foster, who's mixed this beautifully and has made these online seminars possible at Jayen Media here in Bangkok. A really important issue, and it's so good that using this 2-year anniversary to run through these issues, we can remind people that this disaster has not been properly addressed, and the people who suffered in it shouldn't be forgotten. So thank you all for watching from me in Bangkok, and to all of you, good night.